Welcome to It's Settled, the Amitros podcast. Each episode, we're going to dig into the humanity in workers' compensation and insurance claims, exploring the stories of injured people and those who support them, as well as the good work professionals are doing in the industry. And now, I invite you to join me, Sean Dean, General Counsel at Amitros and the host of It's Settled. Now, it's settled. Let's get on to the episode. All right, we're doing a podcast with Heather Sanderson, whom I've wanted to have on the podcast ever since we decided we were doing one. I myself am a Medicare secondary payer geek, and there's only a few people I really look up to in the industry relative to subject matter expertise, and Heather is right at the top of that list. And having been in the industry, and it's funny, when I was looking through your bio, Heather, I was like, oh, we started just right around the same time. So we're going to get into some of that. But while we focus on injured workers and sort of their stories and struggles and triumphs, we also want to showcase people that are really involved in the industry and have been around for a long time, supporting injured workers, even in a collateral way. And Heather, you were someone that I really, truly admire and have looked up to, not only from a subject matter perspective, but just someone who's carried themselves as a leader in the industry. So Heather, I'm super happy and thankful to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Sean. I really appreciate that.
Sure. So you're in Florida, right?
I'm in Florida. I'm in a little town called Palmetto, Florida. Share an interesting fact about my little town, which is just a little bit north of Sarasota, a little bit south of Tampa. Well, I live on a 4.5 acre plot of land, which is still strange for me. I've lived here now 5 years, but I grew up in South Florida in Miami, so I'm a city girl. So came out to the country, and it's really strange. Well, now every morning, wild hogs have been roaming my property in the mornings, eating the acorns from the trees and rooting up our yard. So in the mornings, I go to walk my dogs and I'm being hissed at by wild hogs. So that's my life these days.
That's awesome. So you probably won't remember this. Maybe you will remember this. I believe maybe it was in 2017. It could have been before. I had to intro a panel you were on at NAMSAP, now the Medicare Secondary Payer Network. I had to intro a panel. And it was you, it might've been Roy Franco, it was a couple other people, but I had to tell like these fun facts. And I distinctly remember we were at a having lunch, and I had to come over and I had a notepad, and you told me about some farm with hogs. So this is still occurring all these years later.
Yeah, they've actually come out more than usual lately because they're building up the area around me. So now they have nowhere to go. So now it's pretty much every morning that I'm jolted awake. Who needs a cup of coffee when you have a big black hog hissing at you and your dog's looking at them like they're a piece of meat? So, but
are they friendly?
They actually seem more scared of me than I am of them. So, but no, it's still sometimes I'm like, how did I get here? I don't know. But
so speaking of how did you get here, I have to ask, because as I indicated sort of at the beginning, you started in February 2009. I'm looking at your bio a little bit. So right now, you're president of the Sanderson firm. We'll get into that. Started your own law firm, which is amazing. Prior to that, you were chief legal officer at Franco Signor for almost 6 years. Before that, you were at PMSI Optum. And then you were at GNL, and you started February 2009. I started in MSP in January of 2009. So how did you get here? Like what brought you to MSP? And I mean, I guess even before that, you're an attorney, obviously. What caused you to want to even get into the practice of law and go to law school?
Yeah, I always had a strong interest in making a difference. I know that sounds kind of cliche, but no. I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I went to college. I started taking some of the gen ed courses and then found my way into political science and finding that I loved that. And then I did a minor in legal studies and just kind of felt like law was a good fit. I like to be an advocate, as I mentioned. And so went to law school. Definitely, as you know, Sean, law school is nothing like most people imagine,
Nope.
Nor does it teach you how to practice law.
Sure does.
And there's so many subjects that are not covered in law school. I certainly never had heard of Medicare secondary payer or a Medicare set aside prior to, my venturing into the legal field. And what brought me into Medicare secondary payer, quite honestly, I graduated law school in 2008. I'm living in Miami, as I mentioned, and there's a whole big flooding of attorneys entering the marketplace, and there was a tough time for our economy.
Yeah.
And so it was a tough time. But I thankfully found out through my law school that Gould and Lamb was looking to hire their first staff counsel. And I remember at the time when I spoke with them before I came up and started working there, and they said, we do Medicare set-asides. I was like, what is that? I had no idea. But at the time, it was a great opportunity. I knew going in-house would be a great fit for me. I never really truly wanted to litigate. And I started learning about it. And at first it was kind of crazy at the time. And you'll recall this, Sean. I learned all about MSAs and MSP from CMS memos, each one. And I would read the memo, and then the subsequent memo would revoke the prior memo, and then I'd get all sorts of confused. You remember those days?
Yeah, of course.
So this is good times to remember. But anyway, I just instantly started to love it because it felt just unique to me. It felt like something that was, a space that was growing. I never wanted to do anything where, it's the same monotonous task. Like, for example, real estate law, nothing wrong, nothing against real estate lawyers. It's just not for me. Like, I need change. I want to constantly feel like, I'm helping clients by, helping them stay compliant and, staying up on the changes. And, so I've always loved to write, I love to write. Prior to actually becoming a lawyer, I had said I wanted to be an author. And, I'm thankful that now, my career has segued into a place where, I'm largely known for my writing. I started at Gould and Lamb. I was there for 2.5 years. And then after some changes there, I had the opportunity to go to PMSI, and they were the ones that right at that time, I think it was like 2011 or 12, blogs were the big thing. Now podcasts are the big thing.
Yeah.
But at the time, blogs were a big thing. And I started writing for their blog and getting exposure through that way, and just started to really, truly love what I was doing that much more, especially when I went there. So it's just, it's been an incredibly rewarding experience. And thinking back on the times where, so Gould and Lamb, our focus, in a decade ago, the focus was Medicare set-asides, right? Now we all know, and Medicare has been pushing upon, reporting requirements, and conditional payment contractors have been added on. Now we've got Medicare Advantage and Part D. So the industry has evolved so much in just a decade. And so it's hard to not just stay so interested in it.
Totally. So it's interesting that, it was probably a job posting at your law school that caused you to get into the Medicare secondary payer industry. For me, and I don't know if I've shared this story with you. I've only shared it with a couple people, but I got into it by freak accident, and not freak accident, but just total and utter stumbling upon it. And what happened? I had known an individual from law school that worked at a company called Crow Parity and Albrin, which was an SSDI advocacy firm. Nothing to do with Medicare set-asides. They would represent individuals who had, were on long-term disability policies, and they needed to get on SSDI. And then obviously, they subsequently get on Medicare, but their whole goal was to just get them on SSDI and off the LTD. And this individual told me while I was in law school, hey, if you ever need a job, give me a call. And at the time I was in litigation, and as you indicated, you never wanted to do litigation. I was in it and I was not enjoying it. And I enjoyed certain aspects of it. I really enjoyed the research and writing component, but I didn't like the adversarial aspect of it. It just wasn't appealing to me. I felt like I couldn't be myself. Like I had to almost put on an act to, I don't know, display some sort of person that I wasn't for my client or for the partners. And there were just a lot of bullies. I wasn't enjoying it. And I remember I was defending a deposition in which I had to bring in the state the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It was a tree that had fallen into the road, and it was tragic. It killed an individual.
Mm.
And there was a question of fact as to whether the tree was on the state property or on private property, who was the insured for us. And I didn't want to go into this depot. I didn't want to do it. And I was on my smartphone, which at the time was an iPhone 3G. It's like the second iteration of the iPhone. And it had internet, albeit fairly slow. And I was looking for jobs in the car before I went in to defend the depot.
Wow.
And I saw that there was an opening at Crow Parity. And I'm like, oh, I know this person. And I had their cell phone. So I called them and I was like, hey, the individual's name was Matt. And I said, hey, Matt, I see that your firm's hiring. And I remember you told me if there was an opening for an attorney, we could do it. I would love to get out of litigation. And SSDI sounds interesting. I know a little bit about it. He said, nope. He said, that's not my firm. He said, that's our sister company, Crow Parity Services. And they do Medicare set-asides. And I was like, what's a Medicare set-aside? And he goes, I'm not really sure, but I think you'll like it. And he put in a good word with their HR department. And a couple of days later, I had an interview. And I did all the research I could on Medicare set-asides, but there was very little back then, as you know. It was basically the memos. And I remember reading the Patel memo, and that was the first one I went to. And I saw it reference the statute and the regs. So I'm like, young lawyer, Westlaw account. I go in and I'm looking at the statute, and it's so confusing. And I'm doing keyword searches for Medicare set-aside, thinking I'm going to find an MSA in the statute or the regs. Like, it's nowhere to be found. And totally naively of me, I think that it's a scam. I'm like, oh my gosh, this business is like some scam. Like, see, it's not in the statute. And it was explained to me, and I finally got it. But totally I literally applied to the wrong job. That's how I got into the industry. And I think much like you articulated, you especially liked writing. And that's how I came to know you, because I didn't know. You could probably count on both hands how many people in the country there are that are into this stuff. Maybe a few more. But I followed your blog, and I was like, whoa, like, this person really knows what they're talking about. And you can tell really quickly if you're a practitioner of this stuff. So I always admired your writing, like total fanboy, like would follow your blogs and just was always just so admired how you explained things. And it inspired me to want to be a better writer and write more about this stuff. So thank you.
Well, thank you. That's very sweet. And you write excellently as well.
So you're in MSP, you're doing your thing, you're seeing all these changes in the industry. I want to fast forward a little bit. How did you go from you're working for an MSP company to you're doing this thing that is so amazing? You started your own law firm. Like, how did that happen?
Yeah. So as you mentioned earlier, I was, so after my time at PMSI, I had the opportunity to become Franco Signor's chief legal officer. And I was watching them, even during my time then. So I knew the leadership was great, and I was really excited about that opportunity. And at the time when I started in 2015, we had 25 employees. And then fast forward to 2020, I was leading a legal department of 7, I think I had 4 attorneys, 2 paralegals, and we were up to about 150 employees. And it was a good time for Franco Signor to be acquired. So Franco Signor, for those that are not aware, was acquired by ISO Claims Partners in 2020. And at that time, I just kind of felt like I was at a crossroad, thinking about my next move. And ISO was wonderful. And I could have had a great opportunity there. But I just kind of felt like it was my time. I had enough time in the industry, and I was ready to lead in a different way. I saw that there was a gap in the industry for legally driven Medicare secondary payer solutions, and just knew that there was a need there, especially with so much stuff coming. We've got the civil monetary penalties coming around Section 111. We've got rulemakings around liability Medicare set-asides. I really, really, truly enjoyed being a heavy lobbyist for the PAID Act over the last couple of years, and just last year alone, most of them virtual, but I participated in almost 60 visits with the Hill
Wow.
to promulgate PAID Act. So now we're seeing that come to fruition, and I came out of 2020, to be honest, Sean, I think the pandemic changed all of us to some extent, right? So it wasn't just the sale. It was like, okay, I'm evolving and I'm ready to take that next step. And it just is something that I thought about, and I'll share something else kind of personal.
Sure.
How I made my decision and how I knew it was the right decision for me, right? I mean, it's hard because mentors, that have been close to me, and even my husband or family members would say like, well, where do you see yourself in 5 years from now? And for the longest time, I was happy. I loved my role at Franco Signor, and it was a good spot for me, but I saw things start to change. And I decided to take my first ever, for recreation. Obviously, I've been on plenty of solo business trips, but my first solo recreational trip. And I went out to Arizona, and I turned off all my social media, turned off all my news, and I did some really deep thinking. I went hiking and really got some really good clarity. And I came back and I knew what I wanted to do. I knew that, this would be an area that, folks desired, some, direct MSP legal expertise. I knew that thankfully, and humbly, my reputation was at a place where, I could start something and, really service clients in a consultative way, leveraging my experience over the years and, coming up with innovative solutions to Medicare secondary payer compliance and, finding simple ways for organizations to effectively be compliant.
That's amazing. And the fact that you did it so thoughtfully. Oftentimes you hear, and I don't know if there's a right or a wrong way to make a life-changing decision like that. Sometimes it is just snap of a finger. But I mean, you went on a retreat to Arizona during the pandemic to do it. And like, what was it like? So you're out hiking and you're just sort of letting that idea simmer and just figuring out what's going to come to you. Like what made you want to do a retreat versus, like a SWOT analysis on a whiteboard?
I mean, there was no way that I could get the absolute mental clarity unless I got away from everything. So in addition, to my role professionally, I'm also a mom. I have a 6-year-old. My life is really busy. That's the other thing is that I've said when people ask me like, well, where do you see yourself in 5 or 10 years? I'm like, I don't know. I'm in survival mode, right? So I knew I needed to get away, and it was great. I mean, I sat there and I just realized that I could stay comfortable and stay, but I was not ultimately going to be happy. I was ready to lead my own way. I want to be able to advise my clients directly. I want to be frank with them. I want to be able to give legal advice, and, doing it through a law firm was, I think, the best way to do it. And it was a big leap. It was a big leap of faith. And I'll say that, the new year started, and things have been just really wonderful. I mean, of course, there's those moments where I've given pause. I think any entrepreneur does in any space, right? But ultimately, now I'm in month 7 and growing by leaps and bounds, and really, really excited and grateful about it, and just really excited for what's to come. Like I said, I think there's so much more work to be done, and just really appreciative of, the opportunities that are coming to my firm.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, for whatever it's worth, not that it's worth anything, I'm super proud of you. And having seen what you've done thus far, from just starting out to only 7 months in, it's pretty amazing. I guess what advice would you give if someone's listening, and wants to try to go out on their own? I guess what advice would you give yourself, your January 2021 self, if you could go back, if anything?
I would say having realistic expectations, because especially doing anything in this field, it's slow, right? We're in insurance. So A client might tell me that they are ready to retain me, and then 3 months later, that signed retainer comes in, right? So
Yeah.
I probably would give myself a bit more of patience because I've been excited and ambitious and ready to go, but understanding that that takes time. I'd say establishing a routine early. So I made it a point like, okay, I'm starting my own law firm and I don't have anybody supervising me except for myself, setting routines. So I've been, for the most part, I'd say 95% of the time, unless something has come up, getting up early, still getting my morning workout in, getting started, popping on my computer early, and just, being diligent about following up and staying on top of things. I don't have anybody obviously looking over my shoulder, and I've been wearing many hats.
Yeah.
But I'm excited that the firm is growing, and I'm adding some staff to my firm here in August, and that's really exciting.
That's amazing. So you're a mother too. I'm a father. What was it like? I guess even backing up before you decided to make the leap. What was COVID like? Because I'm always curious to talk to parents, having sort of had my own struggles with, oh my gosh, they're doing remote learning. I'm working from the house. It's super stressful. We're both attorneys. Things are a little bit just more sort of high frequency, high stress, as far as the decisions we're making. Like, how'd you balance being a mom during COVID, and just, I guess, generally balancing kind of a highly stressful career during COVID?
Yeah, that was tough. I mean, my son was home. So he was home for a good couple months in 2020. Thankfully, he went back in the fall. But during that time was when we were, heavily into the acquisition and wrapping that up. And so it was a very busy time. And my husband also has a very busy executive career where he's on the phone all day long. And it was hard because the one family member that we had was a bit compromised, so she couldn't help, and he was, doing Zoom, and we were both working, and as an only child, it was tough. So how did I handle it? um I don't know. I think we all look back and say, how did we do that? I don't know. I'm like, I exercised more than I ever have starting in 2020. I think also just because I wasn't getting out of the house, but that was always great. I love to run. And there was definitely a good amount of wine consumption, I'll
Yeah.
admit, but we got through.
We had to do what we had to do to get through it, and it was, not that it was like having newborns again, but when you're in the mode, as a parent with a newborn, it's just sort of like hour by hour. The days are long and the weeks are short. It really felt like that again. And I've talked to quite a few attorneys, who really struggled with, balancing their career from their kitchen table, and also being a parent. And, I think I'm sort of on the fence about the whole, going back to the office. I think there are some incredible benefits to being in person with people and developing relationships, and also like bifurcating your day. Like I found, like, just going back to like being a father, it was just nice having that drive home where I could sort of kind of process the day and put all the work stuff out of my head, and I'd walk through the door and I'm dad. And like, that's all I would do. Now my work is my home. So there's just this weird, it's sort of always there. But I guess
Yes.
it's about finding a balance. Maybe I need to go to Arizona and do running and yoga and do a retreat. And
I highly recommend everybody take a solo trip because you got to get to know yourself, and it's very easy in today's day and age to just get lost in the busyness of life. And especially, like, I'm not against social media. I'm on social media. I'm on social media a lot, since gotten back on it, but it's easy to get mired in, what is someone else doing with their life, and like making comparisons. But ultimately, and I think going back to like changing from the pandemic, I just started kind of following my heart more, and like just realizing like what I want instead of what I should do. and which is what the solo trip really helped me figure out, like, what is important to me, what's going to make me happy. I'm still young, still have a lot of time to work in front of me, and what ultimately is going to make my soul happy. And everyone's different, and that's where getting to know yourself can really be helpful.
I think that's big, and not to like just stay on the pandemic, but we all we all went through it. I think that's huge because there wasn't a lot of time for self-reflection during the pandemic because you were in it and you were just trying to get through it. So I guess sort of looking at your trip to Arizona, that probably gave you some clarity and perspective that you might not have gotten if you were just at your desk, 9 to 5 or 9 to 8 or whatever, how many hours you were working at that time.
Yeah.
But you talked about running, and I'm an avid runner. I'm not very fast. It's the only sport I've ever done in my life, and the only thing physically I've ever really stuck to. But I've found during COVID, I started running a lot more, 2-3 days a week. And even though like you go for a 6-mile run for an hour or so, or a 12-mile run for 2 hours, it gave me time to find that clarity a little bit. I don't meditate or anything, but it was almost like I felt like I was a little bit, and I could find some clear headspace to think about things and think through, maybe issues at work that I was trying to, like legal problems I was trying to solve or whatever. But so that was like my mini, mini retreat running. So how long have you been running?
Yeah, so I've been into running since about 2010, and at that time was when I started doing races. I did, I think I've done like 8 halves today, 8 half marathons, a handful of 5Ks and 10Ks, and I ran 2 full marathons, Chicago and the Marine Corps Marathon in 2011, 2012. And I admire you, Sean, for you telling me earlier that you're going to be running the virtual Boston Marathon. I actually just recently had an invite to run the New York City Marathon this fall for a cause that's dear to my heart. The group is called Resolve, and they work to help women get assistance with fertility issues and funding. So that's a cause dear to my heart because my husband and I were not able to have a second child. We had secondary infertility, and that's something I've written about. I've also, ancillary to Medicare and Medicaid, I've also written a number of articles for Working Mother magazine regarding these issues and what it's been like to go through that process. But going back to, so they offered a spot to me to
That's
run,
awesome.
but I don't think I can pull the trigger. Well, number one, the date is my son's birthday. So it's the day of his birthday, and we didn't get to have a birthday party for him last year because it was COVID. So I feel like very adamantly that like I want to make sure he has a birthday party. And then I hesitate because I think back to, wow, the training, like as you mentioned, Sean, it is so intense for a full marathon. It's like a second job. And when I trained for those marathons, I wasn't a mom yet. I was working, I was busy with that, but I had more time to go out and do a 4-hour training run on the weekends. I don't know that I could pull that off now. It'd be certainly more difficult, but I will do one of those races again. I think right now I'm trying to not bite off more than I can chew with, getting the firm up and running and growing that, and life getting back to normal, and conferences are coming back, which is really exciting.
I know it's going to be very, very strange to travel. I haven't traveled since February of 2020. It's been a long time.
Wow.
But it'll be good to get back, and hopefully we'll see you out there too. But I'm sorry you can't do the run. But that sounds like an amazing organization. Maybe we can put a link in the description for the podcast so people can be aware of the organization. Are you involved in other nonprofits too? I was just like scanning your LinkedIn bio. It looks like you're, tell me about that.
So my husband and I run a nonprofit called Coastal Impact Fund, and it seeks to restore marine environments. So we do a number of beach cleanups. Another initiative that we're working on right now is getting clams acquired. So when you put clams into oceans that are affected by red tide, which we're affected now here by the red tide in Florida on the West
Yeah.
Coast. We've got red tide. We were out on our boat this weekend and just we had to get out of there. It's a horrible smell and dead
Yeah.
fish everywhere. It's really unfortunate. But so what they do is making sure to deploy these clamshells, which ultimately eat up the algae and help to restore marine environments. So that's something unique that we work on the weekends outside of our day to day. But in the industry, I've been involved since 2017. I've been an ambassador for the Women to Watch Foundation, which is run by Business Insurance and has a number of really remarkable women that are on the board and are ambassadors that are women leaders in our space. And initially, our fundraising initiative was to help women and girls get access to HPV vaccines to prevent cervical cancer, which I just was something I was also very passionate about, because when you learn that, it's 99% preventative if vaccines are available, I was like, that's something that was very near and dear to my heart. And so that group is evolving because Business Insurance has now been acquired by another entity. So we're changing some of our fundraising directives, but we're working right now to locating other women's charities that we can fundraise for that will help elevate women and girls, particularly after the pandemic, that have been impacted, helping them get back to work. And so, for those of you that might be listening, I also highly recommend the Women to Watch conference by Business Insurance. It was virtual last year and free, and it will be virtual and free again this year. Highly recommend. One of the most motivating, most wonderful conferences that I attend every single year. I always wrap up that conference feeling just like we can take on the world. It's really good. And especially, with, women being set back so much in the workforce from the pandemic. So many women have chosen to now stay home just because it just doesn't make sense due to, childcare issues and such. I'm really looking forward to continuing to work with that foundation.
It was a personal post, and it probably took a lot for you to post about it, and not to get into anything heavy or too personal, but it was really inspiring. I remember showing it to my wife, and it was about an incident you went through early on in your legal career, and you're nodding your head like you know what I'm talking about. And it was like horrific, and it made me really angry at first, but then I was like, thinking about it, and I don't really want to get into there was, I guess, just for the viewers, there was an incident you went through early on in your legal career where someone senior to you at an organization you were at, none of the ones we've talked about here on the podcast, but this is prior to that, must have been very early on in your career, did something like highly inappropriate and probably criminal. And I mean, the fact that you still pursued your legal career, and the fact that type of behavior has occurred and still occurs, it's really sad. So I mean, I guess where I'm going with it is, you're a leader in the industry. You're also a woman. What advice would you give to a young girl or a young woman coming up in the industry, or who wants to get into insurance, or in a space around insurance, in an industry that's historically been dominated by men, by white men, frankly? And what would you tell that person?
I would tell that person to continue to persevere, to not feel like their gender is an impediment or that they don't belong. I recall so many times, Sean, especially early on, probably about, a decade ago, realizing I am not only am I a woman, but I'm like the youngest person sitting in a room. That was the case, particularly I started going to the Mark Coalition meetings in 2011, and I knew, I'm like, but then I started to realize, what, that's an asset, right? There's a reason why I'm the youngest person in the room, because I've got something to offer.
Yeah.
And just, having that confidence and realizing what makes sense. For me at that time, I didn't file a formal complaint against my superior for that, improper conduct, because I just thought, I actually just dealt with him directly. And I don't know if this can always occur, if other women face a situation. It might be a situation where you can't face the person that's making you feel uncomfortable. But in mine, it was. And I was able to directly deal with it without making a big deal of it. And then we moved on and continued to work with that person who no longer bothered me anymore. So having confidence and standing up for yourself and just knowing where to draw boundaries. And, like I said, if dealing with a person directly doesn't resolve the issue, then certainly there's a reason why, we have, departments that deal with that in organizations. And I just think that times they're changing ever since, the movements, and we've now got so many diversity and inclusion initiatives across the country. And I'll tell you, out of, the sad side that came from, any discrimination that might have occurred. I'm now just so humbled to hear so many people that have come to me since I've started my firm saying they want to support me because I'm a woman-led business. Like they want to help women get back ahead. And that just means the whole world. I don't want your business just because I'm a woman. I want your business because, I'm going to do a great job. But I mean, it's certainly, on the flip side, there's some benefit, I guess.
Yeah. And I think we're lucky too, especially in the MSP industry, there's a lot of women-led companies and women leaders at the MSP companies. And I think we're really fortunate to have that. And even if you look at the membership within the MSPN or Mark, there's a lot of women, and I don't know what that's attributed to, but I'm thankful for it, and I hope those numbers sort of make their way to just the legal space in general and insurance too.
Agreed.
But, I mean, and I think about it, like I love the space I'm in. I love being in workers' compensation and insurance and sort of on the periphery of MSP. And, I have a 10-year-old daughter, and I'm always thinking, we're always talking about what she wants to do. My gosh, do I want her, especially I remember reading that story and thinking, gosh, do I want my daughter to go into an industry that has those things that occur? And I guess they can occur in any industry, but when you have such a highly male dominated space that we're in, it's unfortunate. But I think your resilience and the attitude you've taken and sort of your mindset there is a testament to you can and conquer that stuff and rise up and do well. So if my daughter wants to go into work comp or the legal space, I'm going to have her call you, and you can.
Yeah, I think also. Oh, absolutely. Anytime. And I think the other thing I mentioned in that post was that we've come a long way. So again, not to focus completely on the negative, but I think about also, I think the other thing I mentioned in that post is that when I told, my family that I wanted to go to law school when I was in college, I got immediately the reaction of, aren't you just going to have kids and get married? And I was like, well, I'm going to do it all. And again, I don't blame my family for that reaction, right? Like my mom didn't work. Most women in the generation before me didn't. I mean, some did, but that's just starting to become normal. Right. And so we've made a lot of progress, and I hope that your daughter doesn't experience, what has happened, because I really think that we're making a lot of progress.
Yeah, I do too. Just to round things out, just because I'm a total super fan of yours as far as MSP goes. And I know that the people watching this, maybe a few of them are into MSP as well, but I want to geek out just for a minute as we close. So I guess what do you think is the next, you'll probably pick a few things, but what are like the big three things you think are sort of on the horizon that we're going to see in maybe the next 5 years or so that will be as impactful as Section 111 mandatory insurer reporting that we saw happen, or the commercial repayment center or something like that? What are like your top 2-3 things we're probably going to see in the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I think just overall conditional payments are going to continue to be something to be concerned about. So on the traditional Medicare side, As we saw in 2015, the Commercial Repayment Center, came on and started seeking recovery on open workers' compensation and no-fault claims. That was a big deal, right? They're still sitting on a ton of debts, and they're starting to get motivated, and they're sending a lot of these debts immediately to the Treasury before, appeals are filed. So they're getting increasingly aggressive. And also, so I think it's obvious to say that I think Section 111 civil monetary penalties are going to come in the next year or two. The one thing that I keep, voicing a lot to my clients is that the most important thing to remember is that your Section 111 and your conditional payments all intersect. And that was one of the driving points in the proposed rule for Section 111, was that you can't be telling the conditional payment contractor one thing and your Section 111 reporting reflects something else. You can't have ORM open on your Section 111 and then tell the contractor you didn't have ORM during that time and you're not responsible for those payments. That's going to carry with it a potential of a penalty of up to $1,000 per day per claim. So conditional payments on the traditional side, Section 111 penalties, that goes without saying. And then the Medicare Advantage and Part D conditional payments, as a result of the PAID Act, starting in for the direct data entry customers in October, and for traditional Section 111 reporting, we're going to start being aware of Medicare Advantage and Part D plan enrollment. And so now that's going to start ramping up those Medicare Advantage and Part D recoveries. So I think, especially because Medicare Advantage enrollment is close to 40% of the population of Medicare, yep. And then over 90% are enrolled in a Part D plan, I think that payers are now going to be dealing with an onslaught more of Medicare Advantage and Part D payments over the next 5 years that they did not before. And unfortunately, my prediction is that the process is not going to be clear. It's going to be messy, because Medicare does not regulate. They require Medicare Advantage and Part D plans to recover conditional payments, but there's no, centralized method to do so. And each plan kind of handles their recoveries differently. So it's going to be a bit of the wild, wild west.
It will.
But I think it's really good that, Medicare is going to return so much detailed information in the query response file to how to locate these plans and the plan number and such. So we should be able to reach out. But even the Medicare Advantage plans are getting ready for this. I spoke with a head of subrogation for a large Medicare Advantage plan recently, wanted to know, how many of these do you think we're going to get? They're staffing up to start receiving calls from payers. And so everybody's kind of getting ready. And so I think it's going to be a little bit wild, a little bit crazy. And so that's something that I think, is going to be a big focus of the industry in the next 5 years. And outside of Section 111, obviously we keep seeing Medicare push back the date on that, proposed rule for MSP and future medical obligations, which, stands to create a process around liability MSAs, potentially impacting the existing work comp MSA process. It's kind of like, I wrote a blog and I titled it, if LMSAs are a reality or a mythical unicorn, because we've been talking about them for over a decade. But in reality, it's on Medicare's to-do list. They need to check that box. What that process is going to look like will be interesting. But I would be highly surprised if in 5 years from now, Medicare didn't release that proposed rule. I think it may be a few years out, but it's definitely no longer than 5 years. Yeah,
I'm with you. If we'd been all holding our breath, we wouldn't be around. But I think 5 years is probably a reasonable time frame on it. I'm most interested in, and I think you're right. I think those are the three things that we're going to see. I think maybe one more that I'm curious, and I'm curious to know your thoughts on it too. I think the private cause of action provision in the MSP is an interesting mechanism that we've seen at least one entity that we know of really hammer that in the payer industry. And you've probably seen some news articles about that particular group, maybe, going public. And, I think there probably will be movement afoot to reform that particular provision or do away with it outright. I think that would be another potential big area. I don't know how you feel about that. If you think that's something that'll change.
No, I agree. I think that the private cause of action is something to be watched. It's certainly been broadly used and used like the group that you're talking about. And even though the PAID Act is going to provide transparency, I still think these litigations going to ensue. Like, for example, in 2019, I served as an expert in one of those cases, the private cause of action cases for a large auto carrier. I was their MSP expert. And in those cases, I mean, the plaintiffs hadn't even issued lien notices to my client, making them aware of the existence of the conditional payment recovery debt, but yet they filed a lawsuit for double damages. And that's the characteristic behind most of these suits. So now we have a situation where primary payers after the PAID Act are going to have the Medicare Advantage and Part D enrollment. Medicare was clear on their webinar. This does not create an affirmative obligation for the payers to now chase down the Medicare Advantage plan. But if you don't, you potentially face a lawsuit. Now, thankfully, that case I served as an expert in, the matter was dismissed. There was no proper notice, but there's a disconnect because the Medicare Advantage plans are getting that Section 111 information, but usually they're getting it after the TPOC has been reported, the settlement's done, everything's closed up, and then by the time the Medicare Advantage plan reaches out, it's potentially months or a year or a couple of years, post settlement. So I think it's something to be watched, and I agree. I think, Sean, to your point that I think that there's going to be some movement to potentially reform it or tear it back, because that group that just got acquired, I think I saw their net worth was like $30 billion or something ridiculous. Yeah. So that's scary. And I think they even refer to them having a blank checkbook, which is just even more scary because unfortunately folks can file litigation for anything. And that's what the group is, historically known for doing. They don't even have their theory is, file now and do the discovery later. Just get in. They don't have the data to even back up most of these suits. So, it's unfair. And ultimately, a lot of them are being dismissed, but you still have to dealing with that. What a headache,
it makes me wonder if there's, and I say it because I think in order to avail themselves to the recovery, they have to bring a federal court lawsuit for double damages. It's not like they're just sending letters and trying to collect administratively. It makes me think that there's probably opportunity for, potentially a Part C or D contractor, recovery contractor to enter the scene to, but it's hard because we're all talking about private entities that are administering those plans. So, I mean, maybe it'll be either way. It'll be highly fascinating to see what happens in that space. But I think the other thing around LMSA is that I just sort of triggered me, and I think a lot of folks in the industry seem to think that these proposed rules are just going to focus on LMSAs. And if you read the abstract closely, it talks about no fault and workers' compensation and replacing outdated regs. And, I'm wondering if, we're going to see an elimination of 411, 46 and 47, and maybe a total revamp of trying to sort of codify MSA principles in these promulgated regs that we don't have now. And I bring it up because I think, we don't have, like I said, when I first started, you can't search the word MSA. And the second you start making it a voluntary process, but it's in the regs, it's a little bit of a sort of a house of cards. Then it's subject to different scrutiny versus a voluntary process that's driven by essentially policy, this sub-regulatory scheme that we have. And I'm sort of just rambling on now, but I think that dynamic's going to be terribly interesting to see how that plays out. And I don't think they can do it by way of policy anymore because of a Supreme Court case that escapes me, the Alina case. CMS isn't going to be able to do this by way of policy. So they're going to have to go the rulemaking route. It's just going to be interesting to see how it all unfolds. Who knows? If we start seeing work comp, MSA regs, and submission requirements, I'm using air quotes, within regs, then it's going to be open up to a different level of scrutiny, and potentially the courts could get involved. So
Agreed, 100%. I feel the same.
It'll be wait and see. But in any event, so that was me. That was me being a fanboy, geeking out with you, talking MSP. Heather, thank you so much for joining It's Settled. Appreciate it very much. You're doing amazing work. I'd love to have you on as a guest again in a year to see what you've done with your firm, because no doubt it's going to be amazing things. And I'll certainly be following your blog and your writing is inspiration from someone who's a leader in the industry. But I can't thank you enough and appreciate it very much.
Oh, thank you, Sean. And thank you, Amitros, for having me. It's my pleasure.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of It's Settled, the Amitros podcast. For more information and episodes, you can visit us at our website at amitros.com. That's ametros.com. Or head over to iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. We hope you enjoyed this episode and look forward to sharing more stories of people overcoming their workplace accidents and bodily injury claims, and those who are working hard to make a difference for them. So it's settled. We'll see you next time.